it is the greatest relief in my work life to work with people where I have that feeling, where I have the feeling of being mirrored, that they are holding up something that is reflecting back. I'm not, it is just, there is such relief in that, to feel seen by someone as a person, as an actor. That's a feeling that I just move towards. It's more and more. And oftentimes, you won't have it right off the bat, and you get there, and I don't mean it's like all or nothing right away. But when you do have the spark of that and it's clear, that's a very hard thing for me to walk away from.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Lily Rabe is an actor. She sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work. What's your way into a new character? Like, do you have a system down yet that works for you?
I would say that I have certainly found things that over the years work for me and that I come back to again and again. But I would say that for me, the best thing has been for that process to stay fluid and to really let it evolve on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the job is and what the role is, but also because of who I am as a person and who I've become as a person, who I was, who I've, so my own evolution. And then really, I do find that I do different things, and it's not always completely conscious, but then looking back after I'm done with something, I'll have a little bit more distance from the thing and be able to sort of recognize, oh, that's why for that specific role, I did X or I didn't do X. So that's a very kind of vague answer, but the truth is it's not like I don't sort of follow some kind of recipe that is like a regimented in terms of this is what I do before every single job. But certainly there are similarities. There's crossover on the Venn diagram, but there is also a lot of that other space, whatever in the Venn diagram, the other parts of the circle that are sort of very unique to whatever job and really the role. And I do feel like, the rules are also made to be broken, and because, preparation is something that I love to do, but I almost, so much of what I love to do in preparation is do as much as I can so that when I'm actually in the space that I'm going to end up in, I feel as free and present as possible, because so much of it is going to get thrown out the window. But if it's not there, it's harder for me to throw it out the window, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And it's almost like what I'm gathering from talking to people, and tell me if this is true for you. It's almost like all that stuff, you need all that stuff to almost fool yourself into believing you got it. Because then when in the moment, you have to let it go anyway, but you have to believe that you're going to be okay. And therefore all that work made you believe it.
Well, it's like, listen, I don't know what kind of a suitcase packer you are, but I can tell you about my suitcase packing. I could show you a suitcase that is, I was away for a week last week. I overpack. I overpack because it doesn't, and I can't tell you the amount of people that are like, no matter where I'm going, they're like, you're not going to Mars. But I'm like, but I don't. Yeah, I know I can buy things there, but I want to bring everything on my back that I can. And the truth is, so much of it will never make it out of the suitcase. It will never get put in a drawer. It will never be put on my body. But for me, yes. It's easier for me to get on the plane having too much stuff. So right. That does sort of speak to what you're saying.
And you're not going to worry. I mean, you're not going to worry on the plane.
I will worry less.
Yeah.
Because then at least I'm not thinking, well, what if it's cold? And what if it's this? Or what if there's rain? And what if there's blah? And, but again, like so much of it, once I'm actually there at the place, I'm like, why the hell did I bring all this stuff? I don't need any of this. I don't need,
Right.
87% of it. But in a way, it is kind of part of whatever that process is for me. And it does speak to exactly what you're talking about. It's like, it is a bit of a trick that you're playing on yourself. Like I have everything I need no matter what the weather is. But of course, inevitably, it's going to hail and you don't have your hail boots.
Right. You got your boots, but not your hail boots.
You didn't bring your hail boots. But you know what? You're going to be okay.
I want to talk about where I first realized the greatness of Louis Rabe.
Oh.
And I just got an email 20 minutes ago from the Public Theater talking about the Delacorte Theater opening back up this year with the Merry Wives. And I thought it was so interesting that place was on my mind because my friend, a great friend who no longer talks to me, but that's another story, stayed up all night in the line for the Merchant of Venice. And then I was the lucky guy that she took to this play that was the talk of the town. And so let's cut to Act 4, Scene 1. Portia, you're playing Portia in the court scene. So there's something that happened. So I'm not an avid theater goer. Like that's my theater because it's free, and that's just the reality of my life. Now, maybe I could afford, there's a lot of people that like, maybe it's just that I don't have the priorities, or I haven't had the priorities to spend my money on theater for whatever, maybe I'm more of a film guy or whatever. So here's that guy sitting there. What I saw in that scene was something, and I'd love you to talk about it. It was like a command of the stage and the material. There was this power that you had as her in that moment because you turned the tides on him. And there's a choice that an actor could make there that it's almost like riding the power, and like you didn't do that. You like use the energy in a different way. I don't know what, but maybe I'd like you to just talk about that play because I had Marcia Stephanie Blake on. She told a wonderful story about being so embarrassed that she was walking around with her No Fear Shakespeare, and then Al comes in the door carrying his No Fear Shakespeare, and she thought, "Oh my God, Al Pacino has No Fear Shakespeare," and it made her feel so validated. But I want to know what your experience was like, and why do you think, if you can be objective, why do you think that this guy felt that way up in row, V or whatever, for you on that stage in that moment?
Well, thank you so much for the compliment, and I'm so, but for also just the way that you're talking about it in such a kind of personal way. Means so much to me. I can talk very specifically about that scene actually, which I think would be an interesting thing to talk about in terms of the process and in terms of how Dan rehearsed it. And I do think, I can't speak for Dan Sullivan, certainly, but I can say that I think, he did something very specific with the way we rehearsed or didn't rehearse that scene. But I would argue, sort of in line with what we're talking about, that it wasn't necessarily completely conscious. Like, I don't think it was totally calculated, and calculated has sort of a bad, I don't mean that, but like that it wasn't like part of his plan, but it was so brilliant what he did. So whether he was directly or indirectly doing it, or both probably, some version of both. We rehearsed, we had an unusually long rehearsal period. And I don't know if you actually broke it down that we had so many more rehearsals, but because it was rep that year, there were a couple of summers, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3, maybe 2, right around there, where they did the seasons in rep as opposed to what they've done before and what they've done since, right. Where it's
that's right.
On shows. Yeah. So everybody except for 4 of us was doing. There were two people in Winter's Tale who weren't doing Merchant, and 2 people in Merchant who weren't doing Winter's Tale. But everybody else was crossing over in some way. So because of that, we were rehearsing over a longer period of time. So again, like, I don't know, actually counting on your hand had more rehearsals, but we rehearsed for longer. So it was just like more time. And we would, we had the schedule, and Dan, you don't spend too much, you're up on your feet pretty quickly. Cause I've now really done a handful of things with Dan. This was my first. But we would, we were getting through the play, and we were working through the play and the scenes, and starting at the beginning. And then, over time we would get to where we were like really nearing the trial scene. And like clockwork, it might be on the schedule that we'd get to the trial scene at the end of the day or whatever, or like clockwork, there would be some reason that we wouldn't do it. And Dan would say, I don't know. I think let's go back. I don't know. We're almost, it's going to be, let's go back to let's go back. There was always like a subtle reason why we didn't do the trial scene. Like, I remember even a day where I think we started it, like we took the inhale, like and then he was like, you know what? I actually think we're going to have an early day today. It was like, we were not going to rehearse the fucking trial scene. And the structure of the play, Shylock and Portia, the scenes really alternate. It's like a scene with Shylock, a scene with Portia, a scene with Shylock, a scene with Portia. Until that scene, we have not met. We have not been in the same. So anyway, we had, so this continued on. That scene, no matter how much theater you've seen or it's a very famous scene in a pretty famous play with a very famous speech, 2 of them. And
people quote that speech and don't even know they're quoting it.
Correct. Right. Yes. So, we finally, very late in the process, like, we've been rehearsing for a while. We have done every other part of the play. And this is tomorrow we're going to do the trial, like in the way that Dan says, like, very, like, I'm like, okay, well, okay. It sounds, I think, we actually are. And we were in one of those studios on like 42nd Street rehearsing. And I had, I've been in rehearsal with Al. We knew each other a little bit. We were telling story, but all of a sudden we walk into the scene and he looks up at me, and I look into his eyes, and it was like his eye color. It was like I saw the color of his eyes for the first time. Wow. And I can remember it so well. I can remember the feeling of it in my fingertips. It was like these 2 people that Dan had I saw then, he had deliberately been keeping us. And later he was like, well, I just hadn't figured it out yet. He always will, he'll never sort of own like his own mad scientist brilliance. But it was like a shock wave that went through my body when I actually, as Portia looked into Shylock's eyes for the first time. And I can't imagine ever doing it a different way, because that's the way we did it. And I guess I would say that really, I think that's, so I also had a feeling of, but again, these all kind of go hand in hand, or worked really organically together, which is that I hadn't really seen, of course I knew the play, but I don't know, I hadn't seen the movie, I hadn't seen a production of it. But to me, she doesn't know what's going to happen when she says what she says to him with that very famous speech. She's not giving a speech. She doesn't know the end of the story. She is not setting a trap. She is making a plea. She's making a point. It is so clear to her what she is saying. And it most certainly, this man with these eyes looking back at her is going to be able to receive this information. And he's going to hear her, because the point, what she's saying is so clear to her, but it's not predetermined. It's not, nothing is rehearsed. She is just speaking to this man from her most honest sort of place of self, but with the expectation that he's going to receive it. And then when he doesn't, her entire world view shatters. It's not just about him. It's everything that has sort of gotten her to the place that she is in as a daughter, as this woman, you know, everything that her father has, you know, all the buildup to who she is as a woman. When he responds the way he does, it's like dominoes of her entire worldview, her entire sort of existence and belief in the world and what is right and wrong, and that you know, her sense of justice and her sense of, so when that crumbles, in the moment, she does not know this is going to happen. What comes out of her is a result of that exact moment. Her reaction to what happens, it is not premeditated. It is not like, and then I'm going to do this. It just happens to her. And it is so loaded with so many things for her, in my opinion. So anyway, those were my feelings about it. But then also that Dan did this thing where he just, you know, was like, we're going to bake banana bread rather than do the trial scene.
And what was it about that specifically, though? The idea of, or what do you think was in that mad scientist's mind? The idea of you getting used to each other in some way, or you getting used to the play all around it, or all that other baking, speaking of baking.
If he were here, I honestly, I can't speak for him. And this is a man I love, you know, and know quite well. But my gut is he would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. We just didn't get to it. You know, I don't, in that sense of like, you know, which is why it's so exciting to talk about process, because, which sort of brings us, it's like so much of it, we can make these choices and these plans and pack our bags with a sort of consciousness, but then so much of it is unconscious. And I do believe that his, it wasn't like, I bet that when he started rehearsal, he was like, he put the trial scene on the schedule and we were going to get to it. And then something was happening that was probably somewhat unconscious, kept him and kept us from getting there, from doing it too soon.
But that's what really makes a good director, being able to size up the situation, change.
And his own feelings about the play. Like that's someone, you know, he's someone, listen, had we rehearsed it on the first day, do I think this is what we did, but like, it was like, I think it would have been okay. And we would have still had, but this was, it really, I will just never forget the moment of looking into Al's eyes, so late in the process with the bill. And you know, I think it's like, because for both characters, and I can certainly say for Portia, everything that happens, everything with the suitors, everything that she is sort of subscribing to and being subjected to and questioning, it all leads up to that moment. And then everything on the other side of it
is a result of it. Yeah.
Is fallout.
Yeah.
Is fallout. And I do think Dan, you know, his feelings about that last act, which, you know, I know it's a last act that like a lot of people are like, well, it doesn't work, but it works beautifully. And it couldn't be anything but what it is. But I think Dan really had such a clear idea of what that was. And I think he knew that it all hinged on that moment. So it's like, I don't want to do it yet.
How do you keep using yourself to get to an emotional place, or particularly to a dark place, and not let that take years off your life and yet still be effective? And you particularly have gone, like, your work, and even in this series, you know, Tell Me Your Secrets, in just the 5 episodes I've seen, you have to go to places and use yourself to get there. Is there a way to do this in a healthy way and yet still effective way?
It's a great question. I don't know that I have the answer in terms of, is there a way to do it in a healthy way? I don't know, because it's part of my job and it's what I do. And I don't, I do think that I do feel sometimes like you want to do things to remind your body that, because of course there's so many things that our bodies don't know the difference. And I have, I became sort of acutely aware of it when I started working pregnant, and I was not doing romantic comedies. And suddenly I was aware of a responsibility towards my just physical self that I hadn't quite honored in the past, probably. And, I always sort of feel like, I'll survive. I'll get over it. You just stare at a wall or whatever. And I remember I had salt burns once from the amount of, and I was like, well, I don't know. We'll put, what do you put on a salt burn? But then suddenly there was like a heartbeat inside of my body. And I remember thinking so acutely, whatever cortisol or, whatever is going through my body, like, is it getting to the baby? And I remember sort of, there was like I had to do something very violent. And I just, this is with my first baby. And afterwards, nobody knew I was pregnant. So I would just go into like a dark corner and kind of, in the best way I could, like beam sort of what I counteractive feelings towards the baby, and hold the heartbeat as best I could, and sort of communicate in whatever ways I could that it was to let it go, and that it wasn't real, and that and then after that experience, I thought, I should do a little bit more of that for myself, maybe too.
Because the first heartbeat is yours.
Because there's always a heartbeat in there. I definitely became acutely aware of it, and the stakes felt much higher as they were, and we care more about our children than we do. That heartbeat it means more. So I had to take better care of it. But I did think after that, whatever it is, to sort of let your body know after something, to try to come back to neutral. But that was not something I had done. My baby is 4. So for years of it, I was not doing that. And I was just, rolling into the next thing. And I hope it doesn't take years off my life. I really do. I want to live for a very long time, especially now that I have children. I really, really want to live as long as possible. But I do think, something that in terms of it continuing to be effective, thank you. But also it never feels the same, because grief and sadness and pain, God, it really changes. I mean, it changes so much because of the circumstances, of the thing, but also I find, my relationship to those emotions, like the experience does change. So it's sort of the double down of experiencing it for this other person, for this character. And then also kind of cellularly, I find that my own relationship to my emotions, not just, anger and joy and all of it, they do evolve so much and sort of occupy different spaces. And I remember, like, I did a scene sort of recently with a really young actor, and we were chatting, and then he walked out of the room and walked back in, and I was crying in the scene, and after, he was like, how did you do that? And I was like, oh gosh, well, there was just so much for her to be sad about in that moment. I mean, there was, and it really, it was like, it's true. There was so much for her to be sad about. I do find that if it ever did feel like, gosh, this feels like this feels too familiar. This feels like then I would be worried. Because if I were playing a different part or I wouldn't want it to feel similar, because I do really feel in my own life that the way I experience emotion is like same emotion, different emotion, different, a whole different relationship to it. So I do try to have a healthier relationship, which I have my babies to thank for, because it did kind of it just made me aware of it in a way that I wasn't, or I just sort of didn't, I didn't take the space that I should have probably been taking. So now I try to do a little bit more of that.
You talked about how you weren't necessarily in a place of looking for or even wanting necessarily to do a series at the time that Harriet Warner came to you about Tell Me Your Secrets. And you said that meeting with her, within a couple minutes, you knew that you had to do this project. And I was just wondering what it was about that meeting in those few minutes that made you think that way. I mean, you were talking about how she went to the bathroom and you texted your significant other, like, I got to do this. So I'm just wondering what it was that she said or did that brought you so quickly to that decision.
It's a very simple answer. And I mean, there are a lot of things about Harriet that I loved, but what I felt and the feeling that I had that made me write that text, which was just like, fuck. I mean, that was sort of the feeling, oh, you know what, fuck, was that I felt seen by her. And to this day, I feel seen by her. And that is something that it is the greatest relief in my work life to work with people where I have that feeling, where I have the feeling of being mirrored, that they are holding up something that is reflecting back. I'm not, it is just, there is such relief in that, to feel seen by someone as a person, as an actor, all of it. And with her, it was like all at once. I had that feeling, and that's a feeling that I just moved towards. It's more and more. And oftentimes, you won't have it right off the bat and you get there, and I don't mean it's like all or nothing right away. But when you do have the spark of that and it's clear, that's a very hard thing for me to walk away from. And when you have that feeling with someone, it's like, I just want to work with them again and again, because you're safe.
Yes,
you feel
safe.
And with safety comes such a feeling of freedom. Dan Sullivan is someone that, and he is a man of few words, but I felt it so immediately with him. And Susanna Bier is someone that it's an amazing gift. And yeah, you want to walk towards it.
There are so many wonderful young people in Tell Me Your Secrets. Wonderful young actors.
They are.
Like
there are.
Bryant Tardy, Christina Offley, Chiara Aurelia. You have these wonderful scenes with these young people. Do you feel like a mentorship with these young actors? Is it can you confess like a certain, like, oh no, another child, that I have to deal with today? I have a feeling you're not like that. But you know what I mean? Like, is it, do you take the opportunity to try and help them? Because their scenes were so, they were so effective. Like, you weren't like watching these kids, and sometimes you watch a scene with a kid and you're just like, they did it. We got through this. Sometimes you're like, oh my God, why? But these were like just characters, and their performances had such depth.
Yes. Mentor makes me feel, I'm like, but I'm a young person. What are you talking about? But one of the young women on the show, I wish I could remember exactly how she said it. When we finished, she was like, the thing I am the most grateful to you for is that you showed me that you can say what you think and what you want and voice your opinion and do it with kindness. And that it can be effective. And I was so complimented, and also so, because I have had women in my life, incredibly strong women. And some of them, I go to, like Judith Light is a person who, when I was, we did a play together when I was sort of starting out, it was my second job in New York, and we did a play together, and she is someone who, starting then and still to this day, I would go to whenever I was like, well, how do I'm stuck on how to handle this situation. Certainly I go to her more than when my mom was on the planet, I went to her with everything. But Judith, is someone who, and I have other women too, but if I could give this young actress a feeling of, I can always use my voice. I never have to second guess that or feel, then I hope to be able to continue to do that, just as other women did for me. But we have to, sort of keep doing it for one another. And I think, collectively, this is such a great, it's such a difficult time.
Yes.
But there are good things that will continue to come out of it, I hope. But there is often such a great, it's the thing about children, like acting with, and I hesitate, I'm not calling some of those actors children, but let me just say, to act with kids or be with kids. And even as a parent, something that your kids do is just keep you so present, because everything's so immediate. I'm hungry now. They're not like, I'm going to be hungry in 5 minutes. They're hungry now. They have to this now. They want this now. They're thinking about this now. Now they're doing this. Then, it's all, and the more of that we can let, that I can let into their room or into my spirit when I'm acting, the better. That's it's a great gift. So acting with anyone, but then sometimes you'll find that quality so powerfully in your 82-year-old.
I was gonna say, I know.
But you're always chasing that feeling of someone who is, who's just right there with you.
Yes. Lily Rabe, this is painful to say goodbye. I beg you to come back on the show.
Absolutely. No, it'd be my pleasure.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.